Is the Detroit Lions Super Bowl window officially closed? Did they miss their potential only chance at a Super Bowl ring in 2023? And will the Lions still be a Super Bowl contender in 2025? Those are all questions that have been asked over and over and over again this offseason. There has been the media who consensusly seems to believe the Detroit Lions will take a step back next year. Content creators from all around the NFL landscape seem to be very low on the Detroit Lions with a 9-8 to 10-6 record, and even other NFC North fans, right? Teams from the Bears and the Vikings and the Packers and even NFC contenders like the Eagles and the 49ers seem to be preying on the Detroit Lions' downfall and seem convinced that the Lions will not only take a step back, but truly fall off a cliff this season. Now, while it is true that the Detroit Lions had a lot of losses this offseason, I think a lot of people are underestimating how well they actually bounce back. This isn't going to be a video of me just saying, oh, don't worry about it, the Detroit Lions are just as good as ever. But I do think there is a lot going on behind the scenes. There's a lot of smaller moves that have been made that most NFL fans that wouldn't follow the Detroit Lions don't even know about. And I think for the Lions fans hearing so much negativity, I think it'll be good to hear why the Detroit Lions still are very much a Super Bowl contender and why they have a chance to not only repeat as a 3-time division champion, not only why they're going to repeat in the NFC playoffs, but why they could still very much be in the conversation for a Super Bowl this year. Now, last season, 2024, the Detroit Lions went 15-2. They were the NFC's number 1 seeded team with the number 1 scoring offense in the number 7 scoring defense. They did that with 22 players on injury reserve and playing a really difficult schedule throughout portions of the season. In particular, their first 8 to 9 games were with a lot of playoff teams. A lot of them were on the road, some tough back-to-backs, and they still walked away with one of the best records in the NFL. However, last season is not this season, and the Detroit Lions went through a lot of changes in 2025 that could see them regress this season. Coaches were a big one. The Detroit Lions lost both coordinators and a number of positional coaches that were highly regarded around the NFL. Their offensive line, I think, consensusly got worse, especially after the early retirement of Frank Ragnow, and their secondary went through a lot of changes. Not to mention that, but the Lions will have one of the toughest schedules in the NFL next year, being not only a first-place team, but just happening to be playing a very tough division in their counter schedule from the AFC side of things. And there's a lot of things going against the Detroit Lions. And while they probably won't go 15-2 again, going 15-2 isn't necessarily the record. I think the goals are still win the NFC North, make the NFC playoffs, and from there, win 3 to 4 games to win a Super Bowl. Those are the only wins you have to be worried about. And as long as you make the dance, as long as you make it to the postseason, I'm okay with whatever record they go with. If they go 14-3, 15-2, that's fantastic. But like we saw last year, that doesn't necessarily mean anything. If they go 10-6 or they go 11-5, they could very well not be a top 4 seed. They might have to go on the road for a wild card game, but I would still trust them to get the job done there just as much as I would to get the job done at home. The Lions are a good football team, and if any team is going to beat them, they're going to have to bring their A game, right? The Lions are not a pushover, nor will they be next season, but there are a lot of things going against them. I think as far as coaches go, they lost quite a few. Ben Johnson is the biggest one, along with Aaron Glenn. Losing both your coordinators in the same season isn't a good thing, right? That's never going to make a football team better, but I think the Lions bounced back in a pretty solid way. They also lost Tyrell Williams, who's widely considered to be one of the best defensive line coaches in the NFL. He's now the defensive coordinator in New England. Tanner Engström, the pass game coordinator, was a bright young mind in the NFL. He went to the New York Jets with Aaron Glenn, and then you have guys like Antoine Randall L., who went to Chicago with Ben Johnson, and a lot of other coaches as well, some other lesser known or lesser involved coaches on the staff. They left as well, but those are really the 5 or 6 really big coaches that left. And that sucks, right? That doesn't look very good. But when you look at who the Lions replaced them with, it starts to look a little bit better. John Morton is a coach that I think is very polarizing in the NFL, is maybe the best way to put it. He definitely didn't have the best offense in New York when he was calling plays in 2017. But from an individual standpoint, every player under him that season had career highs in yardage and touchdowns and receptions and rushes, and they were really good individually for what they accomplished in their career, even if the inevitable overall result didn't necessarily net the Jets a lot of wins or a lot of offensive accolades. So John Morton, despite not having called a top offense in the NFL, has called plays to maximize his players' strengths and put them in positions that no other offensive coordinator really has throughout the rest of those players' career. Kelvin Shepherd has been groomed for the defensive coordinator role since day one. He was the defensive coordinator in Mobile, Alabama when they went to the Senior Bowl all the way back in 2022. He has been the player that the Lions have been looking to. He's been the coach that they have been working up to this role. And I don't think that they would have hired him if they didn't feel very strongly that he was going to be the guy to take this defense and continue where Aaron Glenn left off. It's going to be the same philosophy. It's going to be the same play calls. It's going to be very similar in how it looks to what it did a season ago. And I really don't see a lot of drop off. If anything, I see a big improvement on the defensive side of the ball because of Kelvin Shepherd. And honestly, I wasn't the biggest fan of Aaron Glenn to begin with. Casey Rogers maybe not being as good as Tyrell Williams is still a very well-respected and very good defensive line coach across the league. David Shaw, I think, is a fast upgrade as a pass game coordinator to what they had in Tanner Engstrom. Not that Tanner Engstrom was bad, but I think David Shaw brings a lot of different experience. He's been coaching at the college game for over a decade and has been really good with the teams that he was handed. He did a great job at Stanford with the Andrew Luck era and had some really good passing concepts, put multiple quarterbacks into the NFL, and has been a good pass game coordinator and just a good play caller in the pass game for a very long time in football. I think Tashard Choice, the new running backs coach, is one of the best hires they had. Coming from Texas, he developed Bijan Robinson. He developed, Jonathan Brooks. He developed Roschon Johnson. He developed every single one of those running backs that came out of Texas over the last 5 years. He recruited Jahmyr Gibbs to Georgia Tech, so that connection is already very strong. The Lions got to actually keep Scotty Montgomery and move him to a wide receivers coach while getting Tashard Choice as running back. I think that is a massive upgrade from where they were before. Again, Antoine Randall was fantastic, but I really think Tashard Choice is a fantastic hire in his own right. Taking a look at maybe the, differences in the coaching staff, I think it's fair to say offensive coordinator got worse. Again, I don't think John Morton will be bad, but Ben Johnson was one of the best offensive coordinators and one of the best play calling minds in the NFL. You don't really upgrade from that. I think defensive coordinator, like I said, is equal, if not even slightly putting towards the positive growth end of things. I think he'll be just as good as Aaron Glenn, pick up right where Aaron Glenn left off. And I would not be shocked if he statistically had a better defense than Aaron Glenn had at any point in his time in Detroit. And honestly, I'd be a little shocked if he did not. As I said, Casey Rogers is really good. Maybe a slight decrease, but you're talking a decrease from, say, a number 1 coach at the position to a top 10 coach at the position, right? I think the same thing goes for your pass game coordinator. It is an upgrade, but maybe not a super big upgrade. You're going from maybe a, top 15 to top 10 pass game coordinator to somebody who really understands the game and could potentially be a top 5 pass game coordinator. I think the running backs coach to the wide receiver transition is a little bit tougher to judge. So I'd say it's pretty even. I think Scotty Montgomery and Tashard Choice are very similar as far as just ability to coach as a guy like Antoine Randall L and Scotty Montgomery the year before. I think those things cancel out. So while overall, I think that maybe the coaching staff regressed a little bit, I don't think they regressed a ton. I think they brought in a lot of good players, a lot of good coaches, and a lot of good people to really keep the Detroit Lions competitive and make sure that they are going to have a strong coaching staff for years to come. So maybe a slight decrease, but certainly not a decrease that would make you say, okay, they're going to go from the number 1 seed, best offense of the 17-game era to a below 500 team, because that simply isn't going to be the case. So if that's not the case, maybe it's the players. And they lost quite a few players. They lost Frank Ragnow. They lost Carlton Davis. They lost Kevin Zeitler. They lost Ifeatu Melifonwu. They lost Kendall Vildor. And that's it. They didn't lose a whole lot. They lost a couple really big names at the top, right? Kevin Zeitler, Frank Ragnow as recently, and Carlton Davis, but they also replaced them with some really solid options. They brought in DJ Reed, who statistically was just as good as Carlton Davis a season ago, if not better. PFF just ranked him as a top 6 cornerback in the NFL going into the year, and that's really good for the Lions. They needed a top cornerback like that. They had it in Carlton Davis. I think they still kept a very similar style of corner, very similar production of corner at the position with DJ Reed. Tate Ratledge, I don't think is going to be an upgrade over what Kevin Zeitler was, but if he fits the bill and is what the Detroit Lions have drafted at offensive line in the past, he's going to be really good. And him paired with Christian Mahogany, I think gives the Lions a really strong, young, dangerous guard duo for a very long time, and it should be something that they can rely on for at least the next 3 seasons. Avonte Maddox can replace either Kendall Vildor or Ifeatu Melifonwu on this list. He's been taking snaps at both corner and safety, more versatile, particularly much healthier than a guy like Ifeatu Melifonwu, so that's pretty much a wash. Rock Ya-Sin is a significant upgrade from Kendall Vildor. Then you throw in Roy Lopez and Grant Stewart, who are good special team backup players to fill out the bottom of your roster. So again, why they lost some top end talent, the only real loss they're facing this season is Frank Ragnow, which isn't something to be underestimating and certainly isn't something to be, just glancing over. But if you lose one player and really one position got significantly worse this offseason, you're still doing pretty good, right? You take a look at cornerback, I think they got better. You take a look at safety, I think at the very worst it's equal because Ifeatu only played about 6 games a season. Defensive tackle, I think, got a boost, especially with Tyleik Williams and Roy Lopez. Offensive guard, I really think is going to be equal. Back in 2022, the Lions had their best pass blocking season in a very long time, and that season saw them starting guys like Evan Brown and Logan Strickland at, the guard positions, or Lauren Stenberg at the guard positions. They didn't have all pros, they didn't have pro bowlers, and they were still one of the best offensive lines in football. From pass protection, Christian Mahogany and Tate Ratledge and Graham Glasgow are going to be just fine at that position. I think the play will not drop. And yeah, center did get worse, but I think overall the Lions got deeper, and I think they got more talented this offseason than they were a season ago. And that's without bringing up Aidan Hutchinson, that's without bringing up Aleem McNeil, that's without bringing up, the linebackers that they're getting back and the cornerbacks that they're getting, and so many other injured players that are coming back from that 22-player injury reserve list. Taking a look at the Lions roster right now, and maybe this is a little biased, but I tried to keep it as conservative as possible. You look at quarterback, I think they easily have a top 10 quarterback. Jared Goff just threw for 4,600 yards and 30-plus touchdowns. He's a good quarterback, and I think anybody with a true mind for the NFL can see that Jared Goff is a good quarterback. Is he a top 5 quarterback? Probably not. Is he a top 7 quarterback? Debatably, but I think he's pretty solidly in that top 10 conversation. He's probably right around 8, 9, 10, but I think he's pretty strongly in that conversation. Running back duo, I could have put it at number 1. I really think they are the best, but simply top 2 at the very worst. David Montgomery and Jahmyr Gibbs are 2 of the best running backs at their position. I think Jahmyr Gibbs is a top 3 running back in football. I think David Montgomery is a top 20 running back in football, and to pair them in the same backfield gives the Lions one of the best running back duos in the league. Tight end is top 6. Sam Laporta is obviously fantastic, a second-team All-Pro as a rookie, and Brock Wright is nothing to sneeze at. He's a good, reliable safety blanket type of target, and he's a guy that'll, take you by surprise if you let him get open, if you don't pay attention to him. He's a guy that can hurt you through the air and especially hurt you on the ground as a run blocker. Wide receivers, easily top 10. St. Brown is a top 5 wide receiver. Jamison Williams is a top 10 wide receiver 2. Tim Patrick is, I think, pretty easily a top 10 wide receiver 3. Khalif Raymond is a fantastic wide receiver 4. And from there, they're just a very good, pretty deep wide receiving core. They're easily top 10 in the NFL. Offensive line is where you could really get debatable, especially after losing Frank Ragnow. There is a potential to be saying that maybe they're not top 10 anymore. Maybe they're not even top 15. But with Penei Sewell and Taylor Decker holding down the tackle positions, you have a top probably 5 to 10 duo right there at the tackles. And as I mentioned earlier, Christian Mahogany looked fantastic a season ago. Tate Ratledge looks as advertised through the early portions of rookie minicamp, OTAs, and just obviously being the player they drafted out of Georgia. Graham Glasgow is a fantastic depth option and could even be a starting center for the Detroit Lions. You have other guys like Miles Frazier, who is very good. You have some depth at that position. I still think they are talented enough to be a top 10 offensive line. If you want to put that back towards maybe 15, I think that's more than fair. But they are still a good, well above average offensive line for what the league has. Defensive line is top 15, especially with a healthy Aidan Hutchinson, Aleem McNeil, Tyleik Williams, DJ Reader, and Marcus Davenport, and Al-Qadim Muhammad. They are a good defensive line, and they are quite a solid group when they are healthy. Linebackers easily top 10. They are probably 4 to 5 deep with their starting rotation, and they could really do a lot of damage. Anzalone's fantastic. Jack Campbell's fantastic. Malcolm Rodriguez is underrated. Derek Barnes is super underrated. Grant Stewart, who they just added, is a fantastic special team type of player. And that's not even everybody on the roster at linebacker, but it's a very deep group. It's a very talented group. And unfortunately, they lost 6 linebackers a season ago, and so it looks a bit shallow, but in reality, it's quite a deep group there as well. Cornerback, I think is fair to say, at least top 15. DJ Reed's a fantastic cornerback 1. Terrion Arnold took massive steps at the end of year 2, or at the end of year 1 going into year 2. I think right there you have a top 10, 15 cornerback duo. I think with some of the depth that they have with Amik Robertson and Ennis Rakestraw and Rocky Sin and Avonte Maddox, they're easily depth-wise a top 10 secondary in the NFL and definitely a top safety duo in the NFL. Kirby Joseph is the best safety in football last season. Brian Branch is pretty darn close, at least top 5. He's very good. And the Detroit Lions special teams is nothing bad either. They are a team that potentially could be a top 10 special teams yet again. Jake Bates is phenomenal. Jack Fox is phenomenal. And even their long snapper, their coverage, their ability to return kicks, all of it's really good. And I think they're easily a top 10 special teams as well. So if the Lions are top 10 at every single position, at the very least top 15 with the question marks, why is their window closed? If they have a great quarterback and a great running back and great receivers and great weapons and good coaches and a good defense, who even last year with all the injuries was top 7 in scoring defense, why can't they win a Super Bowl? And when you take a look at the Lions question marks versus the rest of the question marks across the division, I think the Lions still have the best case scenario for themselves. I think if you look at the questions across the NFC North, the Lions question is, are they still elite? Nobody's questioning if they're still good. No one's questioning if they can make the playoffs unless they're really going for a hot take. Everybody knows the Lions are a 10, 11 win football team. They might even be a 12 to 13 win football team if they win a couple games that are a bit tougher. But I think everybody has them around an 11 to 6, 10 and 7 type of football team. And everybody is asking, are they still as elite as they were? Not if they're still good, not if they're still great. Everybody's asking, are they still as elite as they were a season ago? And that's not a bad conversation to be. That's a realistic conversation to have for sure. And I think the answer is actually no. I don't think they're quite as good as they were a season ago, but they'll still be just as good as maybe they were in 2023 when they went to the NFC Championship game. I think they'll be far more well-rounded than they were a season ago, especially on the defensive side of the ball. And they're still a 10, 11, 12 win football team, even with the tough schedule and even with the coaching changes. The Vikings, I think, have bigger concerns, right? It's whether JJ McCarthy can lead that Vikings roster like Sam Darnold did. Anybody could probably tell you that, yes, he's just talented enough to do it, but being essentially a rookie, coming off of a torn meniscus and some meniscus surgeries, is he prepared to lead an NFL franchise to the playoffs and to the promised land? I think that's a lot of pressure to put on him. The new offensive line still has some kinks to work out as well with chemistry. That stuff I'm less worried about, but obviously being led by what is essentially a rookie quarterback is a big concern for Vikings fans, and it should be, because rookie quarterbacks aren't very good most of the time. The Chicago Bears have made a lot of changes. They are a team that is being super glued together from the offensive line to the weapons to the quarterback, and just everything doesn't feel very cohesive yet. It wasn't natural. It wasn't drafted. It wasn't built over time. This team hasn't, meshed or come together with chemistry, and that is a big deal in the NFL. Quarterbacks have to hit their wide receivers. Offensive lines have to understand their blocking schemes. Running backs have to understand the holes that are opening up, and just kind of mixing everything together in a hodgepodge of trades and signings and big free agency splash moves just doesn't always work out. Obviously, Ben Johnson being a new coach is also a big question. Everybody thinks he's going to be very good, but he would not be the first offensive mastermind to flame out at the head coaching level. There seems to be already maybe a little bit of discourse between him and the media and him and maybe some players. Nothing to be too concerned about, but I think it is something to certainly look at. And the Bears haven't proven anything yet. On paper, they look fantastic, but they haven't done anything. They've won the offseason for 4 years in a row, and they've won 17 combined games in those 4 seasons. And then you look at the Packers, who I think are good, but you question consistency. Can Jordan Love stay consistent? Can the receivers stay consistent? Can the receivers stay healthy? Can the defense continue to play at a super high level? Can the offensive line be good and consistent like they were not a season ago? Those are all real questions that they absolutely have to answer. So as much as, yes, the Detroit Lions could potentially regress and likely will, especially from a record and a statistical standpoint, is their window closed? Are they really not considered to be one of the top 3 to 5 rosters in football anymore? They're top 10 at just about every single position. Their coaching staff is still fantastic. Admittedly, maybe not as good as it was a season ago, and they are far from the only team in the NFC to have question marks, even outside their own division. They would beat Tampa Bay in a rematch if they ran the ball a little bit better. I think they would beat Washington with a better defense and running the football a little bit more. The Eagles have massive questions when it comes to how many players they lost on the defensive side of the ball, particularly in that front four. Every team has question marks. Every team in the NFC especially has question marks. And for the Lions to seemingly be the only team that is being affected by that just seems a little disingenuous. Are they going to be 15-2? Probably not. Are they going to be just as good as a season ago? Probably not. But if you told me they win 12 games, you told me they win 13 games because the offensive line still plays very well, I don't think anybody would not believe you. I think if we go to the end of the season and we say, yeah, the Lions won 13 games and they went to the NFC Championship game, everybody's going to be like, yeah, well, that's fair. They're a good roster. They're a good coaching staff. It is that time of the season where everybody needs to overreact. Everybody needs a hot take. And the popular hot take and the popular narrative this year is that the Lions are going to regress. The Lions won't make the playoffs, that the Detroit Lions have lost too many pieces. But without focusing on what the Lions have actually added, the full story isn't being shared. So with that being said, that is my take on the Super Bowl window concern. I think it's still very much open. Are they a lock? Absolutely not. Are they the best team in the NFC? I think it's debatable, but they are still a good football team. They are still easily a top 3 football team in the division or in the conference. They are still one of the top, I'd say 5 to 6 rosters in football, even after the Frank Ragnow news. And the Lions aren't going anywhere anytime soon. So with that being said, thank you so much for watching. Let me know down in the comments below your opinions on the window. Let me know if you think the Lions window has been missed, if they still have a chance at a Super Bowl this year. I'd love to hear your guys' opinions. But with all that being said, that's all I got for you guys right now. Thank you all so much for watching. And until next time, and as always, go Lions.